The United States has authorized the departure of non-essential government staff and their families from Israel amid fears of a possible strike on Iran. The US Department of State has advised citizens to consider leaving Israel while commercial flights are available and warned against non-essential travel. This follows inconclusive talks between the US and Iran over Tehran's nuclear program, with further discussions expected next week. President Donald Trump has positioned 2 carrier strike groups in the region, reportedly ready to act if he believes Iran is not serious about ending its nuclear activities. US Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, sent an urgent message to embassy staff urging anyone wanting to leave to do so today, warning that airline seats could be in high demand. Oman's Foreign Minister, Badal Abdulsaidi, who has acted as a mediator between the US and Iran, flew to Washington to brief US Vice President J.D. Vance in what appears to be a last-ditch effort to prevent a military strike. Iran has refused to fully abandon its right to enrich uranium, though it has offered limits for civilian research purposes, including its Tehran reactor, which produces medical isotopes. The highly enriched uranium stockpile in Iran remains a key issue. Officials say it could be reduced through dilution and was done under the 2015 nuclear agreement. Technical talks are scheduled next week at the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, with Director General Rafael Grossi expected to provide an update on access to Iran's nuclear sites. The region remains on edge, with diplomacy and military readiness continuing side by side. And in a further sign of concern, Britain said on Friday it had temporarily withdrawn its staff from its embassy in Tehran due to the security situation. A development now being discussed across GB News.
The British government has temporarily withdrawn its staff from Iran due to the security situation. Let's get more with our national reporter, Charlie Peters. Now, Charlie, what more can you tell us?
Well, this comes a few hours after the US Embassy, also in Jerusalem, said that its non-essential staff can leave Israel amid the possibility of a strike on Iran. And of course, the natural reaction that would inspire. We have seen in the 12-day war that occurred last year very specific and choreographed responses from Iran. But amid this significant, or very significant, military build-up by the United States in the region, it's highly likely that any response would go beyond that demonstrated, choreographed, easily shot down military response that Iran provided last year. So this is a step from the British government to protect its staff in Iran. We'll now look to see if they take similar action in embassies and consulates within the broader region. For example, embassies in Iraq and forward sort of British bases in Syria and any other locations, Jordan as well. That would be a key indicator and warning that further action is likely. Can also say that amid this escalating security situation, the mayor of Beersheba, which is a city adjacent to the Gaza Strip in southern Israel, they have mandated that all of its shelters are now to be made open. That was a decision made this morning. And we have also started to see more military hardware continue to fly out to the Middle East, despite there already being an armada of weaponry, not just the US Navy carrier strike group, but also an expansion of US Air Force assets in bases predominantly in Jordan, but also other areas in the region as well. We've seen flights going via Cyprus, via the British sovereign base area there. Also in Qatar, we have seen a lot of people being removed from that location. But what we're seeing now in Israel, the amount of military hardware in that country is now very significant, which is likely why we're seeing British embassy staff being withdrawn from Iran.
It does sound like it's ratcheting up, doesn't it? Another notch. Charlie, thank you so much for that update on that breaking news story. OK, let's talk now to Shadow Minister for Defence, Mark Francois. Mark, this sounds like it has ratcheted up, as we just said again. Do you have any more information for us on this story?
I'm afraid that I don't. I wouldn't want to pretend that I know things that I don't know. I think what is in the public domain is that the United States now has very serious military assets in the region, including 2 fully-fledged carrier battle groups. They've moved bomber aircraft, they've moved tankers and all the enablers as they're known. So it's probably true to say that they have the assets in the theatre to enable them to strike Iran were President Trump eventually to decide to do so. It can sometimes take several weeks to assemble all the ships and aircraft that you would need. Well, it looks as if they have been assembled, and we shall now have to see what evolves over the weekend.
And Mark, what is the UK's contribution to this? We know the embassy has been temporarily closed, but it was again last month. I mean, what do we have in the area? Do we have any military in the area?
Well, the government, the British government, have announced some days ago that we had sent more aircraft to RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, which is our main base in that part of the region. But I think our MOD was saying that those aircraft have been deployed mainly for defensive purposes to protect Akrotiri and other British assets in the event that there were to be military action. So what I will also say is the world would be a more dangerous place if Iran somehow were to be able to acquire a viable nuclear weapon. We simply cannot allow that to happen. We know that the Americans have been in intense negotiations with the Iranian leadership. We've also seen those dreadful scenes of Iranian civilians being murdered by the Iranian government. So let us see whether or not these negotiations, the American-led negotiations, are successful in ending Iran's nuclear program. But it's obviously a tense situation, and we should just have to wait and see what happens over the weekend.
And Mark, of course, President Trump has also briefly laid out his case for a possible attack on Iran and saying that they should not have nuclear weapons. But Mark, because the situation could potentially be so dangerous, should Britain get involved directly in any offensive?
Well, there's a question of whether Israel would be involved or not. There's a very interesting question about whether or not the Americans would use the runway at Diego Garcia were they to strike Iran, because they flew very many combat missions from Diego Garcia, both during the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. That's why it's such a strategic location. So we're led to believe that there have been discussions between the British government in London and the Americans about potential use of that runway. And then that leads you into this whole wider debate about the Chagos Islands, where it would appear that the chaos continued. We saw in Parliament just yesterday a Foreign Office minister saying that on Wednesday, that the negotiations had been paused, and then Number 10 basically in the Foreign Office saying almost within the hour that their own minister had misspoken, and the negotiations regarding the Chagos Islands had not been paused because the Americans have a veto on that deal. So if Trump says no, it's no. And I very much hope that he will, because the idea of giving away £35 billion of British taxpayers' money to Mauritius to rent back some islands that belong to us in the first place is both strategically and economically bonkers.
Mark, unfortunately, we have run out of time, Mark. Thank you so much. That's Shadow Minister for Defence, Mark Francois.